G'day guys, Mackie with the Outer Circle. Recently I did a video on the Armiger Warglaive and how I don't like the concept of bringing out new release miniatures in a getting started style box set with existing units that are not overly popular. Now, a lot of the feedback we got, well, it was pretty down the middle. More likes and dislikes on the video and that kind of thing. But a lot of the people were complaining, oh, you're having a bitch, you're having a whinge, you couldn't do better. Xenos need love too, da. Now, don't think I'm oblivious to feedback. What I'm doing today is a video based entirely around that feedback. This is going to be me being nice and professional for a change and consulting Games Workshop, all for free, using my personal experience from playing this hobby for over 20 years and being in business myself. We're going to talk about what you need to do when it comes to starter sets, and we're going to talk about the rumoured Chaos Space Wolf starter set coming at the end of the year, or boxed game if you will, coming at the end of the year. So, I've done a video similar to this before, talking about what I think a getting started set should entail, and today we're going to look at what I believe it entails. Now we're in 8th edition, now we're in 2018. So, on your screen now, you're seeing the Outer Circle Ideal Starter Set for 40k 2018 edition. In this, you get a two-part package, and this is decided on by the people who are going to buy the starting set. So you'll walk into the store, and in one box, there'll be this little board game, and that's what you see on the left here. And this box will contain a basic board, basic terrain, very basic rules for 2 people. That's important here. Both the people who are buying this box should be getting rules out of it that they can take home for their respective army. And this should include a copy of all of the game core rules. So if they want to play someone else, they can at any one time. They don't have to share the rulebook between them. This is something that has consistently let Games Workshop down for 20 years. They only ever seem to provide enough rules for one copy of the game. Now this is great if the same 2 people, like a brother and sister, or 2 brothers, 2 sisters, 2 good mates are playing the game over and over again. Not very good if you have 2 friends who want to go off and play in other communities. So, you need to include 2 sets of rules. Also, a generic scenario, something that is not specific to any one faction. This way you can ensure that any 2 combinations of getting started sets that are playing this scenario are both viable and can both play a simple, easy to understand game. On top of that, dice and data cards. Enough for both people. So again, 2 sets of. And I probably should have elaborated on that in the visual that you're seeing now. My apologies, I didn't think of that prior to writing the video when I did this artwork. Now, on top of this core basic game, the 2 people who are buying it will get a choice of 2 getting started forces. These forces will be matched against one another in points, not just in the content of miniatures or the cost. Frankly, some of the getting started forces are ridiculously good value for money compared to others, and especially in the units you get within. All getting started forces, or start collecting forces, should be balanced against one another. They should be the same sort of points, same matched play if you will, so that way neither side is going to have a runaway advantage if possible. So, in theory, let's pretend our 2 wargamers walk into a Games Workshop store and they're into the game, they want to play it, so the staff manager says, hey, you want to get into this? Here's what you got to do. Buy a start collecting box, and this start collecting box comes with the rules, your table, your terrain, dice, all that kind of thing, enough for the 2 of you. You've got 2 little tables in it, you've got terrain that will split between 2 people, your dice, all that kind of thing, and you get to pick the armies you want, guys. It's not Marine centric, it's not Xeno centric, it's whatever you want. And then they go off and they pick their armies. Maybe they'll pick 2 Marine armies, maybe they'll pick 2 Orc armies, maybe they'll pick 2 completely different armies from 2 totally different ends of the spectrum, like Dark Eldar and Tyranids. But the point is, they get to choose. They're not having some boxed game force-fed down their throat. And I think that's important, because how many times have you seen players get into this hobby, young players who don't have the money to get into Warhammer proper, and they're confronted with this problem of, hey, you want to get into this game, you need a Dark Vengeance box set, or you need a, Battle for Macragge box set, and they're like, well, that's great, but I want to collect, Tyranids or something. And it's like, well, you've now got to buy those Tyranids on top of this whole starting collecting box and this whole core rulebook package that you don't need. You only want the paper rules out of it. That's not good for new players, because they've got to spend more money than they'd like to, and if they don't have enough money on them at that point in time, you may not capture them. They may say, oh, you know what? Maybe this game isn't for me. I could go spend my money on something else and get instant gratification. Instead, I've got to spend so much more money on this game because I want to collect this race. Whereas it's fine if they want to collect, say, Space Marines. There's always a core set with Space Marines in it. Not very helpful to a little kid who wants to collect something else. Like, you want to collect Orcs? How's a Dark Imperium box going to help you with that? It's just not. So this is the sort of thing that you need to think about if you're creating a starter set for 40k. It needs to have enough rules for both players, enough miniatures for both players, and those miniatures need to be balanced against one another and the sort of miniatures that those children want to buy. You can't be forcing them to buy other games and other rules for factions they don't actually want to collect, because that is money wasted to them and it may throw off your sales. Now, we've got that out of the way. My free consulting on that, my nice professional, lovely attitude. What we need to look at now is this rumoured Space Wolves versus Chaos set. And we can sort of draw a few conclusions, make a few other thoughts, but let's look at what there is now. This is the Space Wolf and Chaos Space Marine Stark collecting forces side by side. They cost the exact same amount of money. Now, a few interesting things to point out. First of all, which do you think is more value for money? The Chaos Space Marines box, which features sculpts that are quite literally from when 3rd edition was still around, except for the Hellbrute, who is a 6th edition miniature, and the Chaos Lord, who happens to be a 5th edition miniature. Or the Space Wolves, who are mostly from 5th edition. I think I know which I think is better value for money. So first of all, a new getting started core collection with Chaos. Good for the Chaos players if it gives them new Chaos Space Marines. However, what are they going to do with them? Are we going to get a repeat of this style of Space Marine with gold trim all over and these sort of pseudo Marines with just a ragtag mishmash of armour? Or are we going to get something a bit more unique, a bit more stylish, something with a bit more thought to it, where it actually looks like corrupted Marine armour, much like what they did with the Chosen, perhaps with less gold trim, because I'm not a big fan of just making Chaos Space Marines more gold trim on normal Marines. So that's the first thing I want to see. On top of that, is it a set we want or need? Space Wolves are a popular faction, however people are very over the Imperium at this point. In fact, a lot of people are over Chaos as well at this point, with this whole focus that's just happened with Nurgle and Tzeentch, which, hey, both factions deserve that, especially Tzeentch, having a sort of faction focus for a period of time, considering they've had no love in quite literally over a decade. But the main gaming community as a whole is over this. I think Space Wolves is probably not the way to go. If you're looking towards perhaps Eldar and Orcs, that would be a more ideal starter set, I think. A better box game to be moving towards. But if I have to be stuck with this, I would really like to see them do something good with it. I want to see them introduce new Chaos Space Marine sculpts, and on top of that, I want them to release a good Chaos Space Marine sculpt for the core Chaos army. Something that comes out not just in this box game, but also comes out separately to the box game. So people aren't stuck with these miniatures that are 20 years old at this stage. As for the Space Wolves side of things, well, the miniatures they've got are quite good, but I'd be willing to bet that they'll end up with a Primaris Space Wolf sculpt in this new box if it comes. in which case I don't expect them to have the beautiful posability and war gear and weapon options of the Space Wolves in this Getting Started box. I would expect them to be that sort of snap fit variety of Space Wolf or Primaris Marine version of Space Wolves that we're starting to see filter in now. Primaris Marines with different shoulders, a few different heads. Obviously with this sort of game I would also expect 2 new characters, a Chaos one and a Space Wolf one, and both of these most likely will also be snap fit characters and probably named characters as well at that. You know, something like how they've had Bjorn Fell-Handed, Gygor Fell-Handed, Ragnar Blackmane, probably something like that, you know. Same thing with the Chaos Lord. So a named character, Primaris feel to them, possibly an upscaling as well of the Chaos Space Marines to suit that newer sort of more heroic scale. I know it sounds silly, but Games Workshop uses heroic scale, and now they're making them bigger. You would have noticed this with the Rubric Marines, and especially with the Death Guard Marines, so I wouldn't be surprised if we saw a more Mark V influenced power armor coming with the Chaos Space Marines, and of course a bigger size and scale to them. This won't necessarily mean that you have to throw away all the old Chaos Minis, but it is definitely a move by them to sort of restrict those third-party parts and to really narrow down what they own, their copyright, what can be put on their miniatures. So, call me cynical if you like, but I'm pretty certain that's the way they'll go. I also wouldn't be surprised if they add a new war machine or item to both factions. There's Fenrisian Wolves and that kind of thing, obviously, in the Space Wolves now. Something like that, or some form of Dreadnought, wouldn't be too far out of the picture. Perhaps a Redemptor Dreadnought with Space Wolf upgrades on it. And for Chaos, something like that as well. I think some sort of Demon Engine, possibly like a smaller version of the Mauler Fiend, might pop up in the starting box, but I can't know these things until later on down the track. No one's told me anything, so my guess is as good as yours, but I try to just guess based on what I've heard in the past, what I've seen in the past, and what I've experienced over 20 years. And I think Games Workshop's a pretty predictable beast at this point. They're very set in their ways, and you can very much predict the sort of things they're going to do. And in this instance, I'm very, very certain that Primaris Space Wolves will make an appearance as well as an upscaled Chaos Space Marine force. Again, named characters and that little sort of gribbly, beastie, large model that sort of is the capstone on the force, whether it's a Redemptor Dreadnought or your fetid bloat drone, that kind of thing they've done in the past. Yeah, something like that will probably pop up. And it'll be a new, wow, check this out sort of unit. And that's usually the way these things go. If they do something very different to this, please come back to this episode and tell me to eat my words. But that's the way it goes. And so, just to cover off again, because it's quite a short video this one, the ideal starter set for 40k in 2018, you should be getting basic board, basic terrain, basic rules, and dice and data cards for at least the 2 players involved, well, for the 2 players involved, a generic scenario that any particular forces used can both play, and of course the choice of 2 getting started forces, or start collecting forces. That way the 2 players get the faction they want and they're not paying for something they don't want. This will build up customer loyalty, and it will mean that they will spend the money on the day. They won't sit there umming and ahhing and say, I can only afford to buy Dark Imperium, but I don't want either of those armies. I want this other one, so do I buy it or not? No, I'm just going to go across the road and buy a video game instead. No, we want to eliminate that, and we want to do it for as cheap as possible. Anyway, final thought. First Strike, I used a lot of the artwork from First Strike, or the pictures from First Strike, to demonstrate the board and the rules on the left. First Strike doesn't have enough miniatures for a basic introduction to the hobby, in my opinion. 6 miniatures is way too small. It doesn't represent the scale of a 40k game. You do need something along the lines of the getting started. You want to be looking at something like 10 to 20 models per side, preferably with some variety to the miniatures as well, beyond just what they're armed with. Like, I don't want to be seeing 2 identical squads of Primaris Marines, one's got plasma guns, one doesn't. That's not different units, or different enough. I think a different stat line in there, so that people understand the differences in stat line, is important. and also scale, so larger things, larger bases, multi-wound creatures, that kind of thing. Very important when it comes to getting started. And that's where First Strike falls down. I think First Strike is the closest they've come to a really, really, really good value starter set, but it falls down on that hurdle of just not providing enough miniatures in there with enough differences in stat line to get both players used to the game itself. If you make it too small of a game, they're not learning 40k, they're learning a bastardized skirmish game, and I don't think that's the way you need to go. So that's my thoughts on an ideal starter set for 40k. Please let me know your thoughts below. Free consultancy, guys. I can do it, I just choose not to. I'm Mac with the Outer Circle, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.